The rain fell in relentless sheets over Manhattan, blurring the neon glow of Times Square and turning the streets into rivers of reflected light. Inside his black limousine, Nathaniel Harper, a 45-year-old white American millionaire, stared out the tinted window, his sharp blue eyes tracing the chaos of umbrellas and hurrying pedestrians. At the helm of Harper Industries, he owned a penthouse on the Upper East Side, a private jet, and a fortune that could buy anything, or so he thought. Yet, as the car idled at a red light on 42nd Street, a familiar ache gnawed at him. Money couldn't fill the void left by 2 failed marriages, a distant father, and a life spent chasing control. He knew he needed an heir, someone to carry the Harper name to prove he was more than his father's shadow. The light turned green, but Nathaniel's gaze caught on something or someone across the street. Under a tattered awning, a young black woman stood, her fingers dancing across a battered keyboard perched on a milk crate. The music, a haunting blend of classical precision and soulful improvisation, cut through the rain's percussion and the city's din. Her worn jacket clung to her slight frame, and a faded backpack slumped at her feet. But her music was alive, defiant, as if daring the storm to silence her. Nathaniel's chest tightened, a sensation he hadn't felt since his mother played Chopin on their old upright piano before her death when he was 12. "Stop the car," Nathaniel said, his voice low but firm. "Sir, we're in the middle of traffic," his driver, Henry, protested, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Stop. Now." The command left no room for argument. Henry pulled over, tires hissing on the wet asphalt. Nathaniel grabbed his umbrella and stepped out, the rain soaking his polished shoes. He crossed the street, shielding himself, and stopped a few feet from the woman. Her melody shifted, weaving in a gospel-like cadence that stirred memories of his mother's records music he'd buried with her. The woman's eyes, dark and focused, didn't lift from the keys, but her presence commanded the corner as if it were Carnegie Hall. "That's remarkable," Nathaniel said, holding his umbrella over her to shield her from the downpour. She startled, her fingers pausing mid-note. Her gaze flicked up, wary but steady, taking in his tailored suit and the limousine idling nearby. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying a faint southern lilt, and just trying to make enough for a meal tonight. "What's your name?" he asked, studying her. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps in her late 20s, with a quiet dignity, despite her soaked clothes and the exhaustion etched into her face. "Lila Jackson," she replied, her hands resting on the keys. "And you are Nathaniel Harper." He paused, the weight of his following words pressing against his usual restraint. "I have a proposition for you, Ms. Jackson." Lila's eyes narrowed, her posture stiffening. "I'm not that kind of woman, Mr. Harper." "No, that's not what I mean," he said quickly, pulling a business card from his coat pocket and handing it to her. "I'm looking for someone to carry my child. In exchange, I'll provide financial security, $5 million, plus living expenses during the pregnancy. Enough to rebuild your life, pursue whatever dreams brought you to this corner." Lila stared at the card, her fingers tightening as rain smudged the ink. "You're serious?" Her tone was skeptical, almost mocking. "Why me?" Nathaniel hesitated, his instincts, a businessman's gut honed by years of deals, guiding him where logic faltered. "Because you have talent, strength. I've been searching for the right person, and something about you." He trailed off, unwilling to admit the music had stirred something personal. "I trust my instincts." Lila laughed, a bitter edge to it. "So I'd be a business deal, a transaction, a mutually beneficial arrangement," he said, his voice steady. "Discretion is required, and you'd need to leave the country after the birth. Think about it." He handed her another card. "This is my lawyer's number. Call within 48 hours if you're interested." Thunder rumbled overhead, and the rain intensified. Lila clutched the cards, her expression unreadable. Nathaniel turned back to his limousine, leaving her standing in the storm, the weight of his offer hanging between them, like the final note of her song. In the car, Nathaniel leaned back, his mind racing. He hadn't planned to make the offer tonight, but Lila's music had unraveled his control. He thought of his father, Richard Harper, whose cold ambition had built an empire, but left Nathaniel with lessons in power, not love. An heir was his chance to rewrite that legacy, but Lila's defiance, her refusal to shrink under his gaze, challenged his carefully constructed walls. Across the street, Lila tucked the cards into her backpack, her fingers trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of possibility. $5 million could change everything. She thought of Juilliard, where she'd studied for 2 years before a scholarship was yanked in favor of a less controversial candidate, a polite way of saying her blackness didn't fit their image. She remembered her mother, Elise, singing gospel hymns in their Atlanta apartment, urging her to keep playing despite the world's rejections. Elise's death from cancer had left Lila adrift, her savings drained by medical bills, her dreams buried under eviction notices and shelter cots. Lila resumed playing her fingers, finding Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, but weaving in her mother's gospel chords. The music was her anchor, her defiance against a city that had tried to break her. Nathaniel's offer was a lifeline, but at what cost? She glanced at the limousine, disappearing into the rain, its taillights fading like a question mark. 48 hours. She had 2 days to decide whether to sell her future for a chance at a new one, or to keep fighting on her terms. As the last notes of her song dissolved into the storm, Lila packed her keyboard, the weight of Nathaniel's cards heavier than the rain. She didn't know it yet, but that rainy encounter was the first note in a symphony that would change their lives, not through a deal, but through something neither had planned, a connection forged in music, vulnerability, and the courage to rewrite their stories. Lila Jackson sat on a metal bench in a midtown subway station, the rumble of trains drowning out the echo of Nathaniel Harper's offer. The business cards he'd given her, crisp, embossed with gold lettering, felt like weights in her palm. $5 million to bear his child, plus living expenses in exchange for her silence and departure from the country after the birth. The proposition was as cold as the rain that had soaked her the night before. Yet it dangled a future she'd thought impossible, a chance to reclaim her music study in Vienna and escape the shelters and street corners that had defined her last 3 years. She tucked the cards into her backpack and boarded a train to Brooklyn, her keyboard case slung over her shoulder. The car was crowded, commuters avoiding her gaze, their eyes skimming over her worn jacket and scuffed boots. Lila was used to being invisible, but Nathaniel's attention had unsettled her. Why her? His talk of talent and strength sounded rehearsed like a pitch, yet his eyes had lingered on her music with something raw, something she couldn't name. Lila found an empty room with a battered upright piano at a rundown community center in Bed-Stuy. The space was a lifeline, a place where she could practice for free when the volunteers took pity on her. She set up her keyboard, but her fingers hesitated. Instead, she closed her eyes, remembering Juilliard, 2 years of brilliance cut short when a scholarship was redirected to a student with broader appeal. The professor's words still stung. "Your style's too urban for our donors." Her mother, Elise, had urged her to keep going, but cancer took her before Lila could prove them wrong. Medical bills drained her savings, and eviction followed. At 28, she was a ghost in the city that had promised her dreams. Lila's fingers found the keys, playing "His Eye is on the Sparrow," her mother's favorite gospel hymn. The melody filled the room, its soulful chords weaving through her memories of Elise singing in their Atlanta kitchen. "Keep playing, baby girl," Elise would say. "The world can't ignore your heart forever." But the world had ignored her, and Nathaniel's offer felt like a Faustian bargain, her body and freedom for a shot at redemption. Could she trade one loss for another? The hymn ended, and silence pressed in heavy with the choice ahead. The next morning, Lila stood outside the gleaming office of Marcus Tate, Nathaniel's lawyer, in a Manhattan skyscraper. Her faded jeans and hoodie clashed with the marble lobby, and the receptionist's tight smile made her feel like an intruder. The woman said, "Mr. Tate will see you now." Her tone clipped. Lila squared her shoulders, clutching her backpack, and stepped into an office lined with law books and city views. Marcus Tate rose from his desk, his warm brown eyes contrasting with his sharp suit. He said, "Ms. Jackson, please sit," gesturing to a leather chair. His voice carried a faint Harlem cadence, a hint of shared roots that eased Lila's nerves. "I understand Nathaniel made you an offer. I'm here to explain the terms and answer any questions." Lila sat, her hands clasped tightly. 5 million living expenses carry his kid. Keep quiet and leave the country. That's about it. Marcus nodded, sliding a contract across the desk. In essence, yes. You'd move into Nathaniel's guest house immediately. All medical expenses are covered, and the payment is deposited in an offshore account after delivery. Confidentiality is non-negotiable, and the relocation clause ensures privacy for the child. Privacy. Lila echoed, her voice sharp. You mean erasing me from the picture? Marcus leaned forward, his expression softening. I won't sugarcoat it, Ms. Jackson. This is a business deal, and Nathaniel's had his share of complications, ex-wives, and family drama. He's trying to protect his legacy. But I've known him for 10 years, and he doesn't choose lightly. He saw something in you. Like what? A desperate woman who won't say no. Lila's bitterness surprised her, but Marcus didn't flinch. He said he saw a musician who plays like the world's listening, even when it's not. That's not desperation, that's power. Lila looked away, her gaze landing on the contract. The pages were dense with legal jargon, but the numbers stood out. $5,000. She thought of Vienna's music halls, where she could study without fear of eviction. She thought of her mother's hymn urging her to rise. But she also thought of her body, her future bartered like a commodity. The receptionist's earlier sneer flashed in her mind, a reminder of how the world saw her, a black woman scraping by, unworthy of spaces like this office. What happens if I say no? She asked. You walk away, Marcus said. No strings. Nathaniel's not in the habit of forcing anyone's hand. Lila's fingers brushed the contract, her mother's voice echoing. The world can't ignore your heart. But the world had, and she was tired of shelters, hunger, and playing for coins. This deal wasn't salvation, but it was a door. She could step through and fight for her dreams on her terms, or stay outside invisible. The choice felt like a betrayal either way. That night, Lila returned to the community center, the piano room lit by a single flickering bulb. She played His Eye is on the Sparrow again, but the chords were fierce this time, a declaration. She saw her mother's smile, her Juilliard rejection, the streets that had tried to break her. Nathaniel's offer was a deal with the devil, but Lila had faced worse and survived. She could take his money, bear his child, and still be Lila Jackson, musician fighter, her mother's daughter. The next morning she called Marcus. I'm in, she said, her voice steady. Where do I sign? Meet me at the office in an hour. Marcus replied, a note of respect in his tone. I'll have everything ready. Lila hung up, her heart pounding. She packed her only possessions, keyboard and backpack, and stepped into the Brooklyn dawn. The contract was a gamble, a tightrope over an abyss. But as she boarded the train to Manhattan, the melody of her mother's hymn played in her mind, a reminder that her heart was still hers, no matter what she signed. Nathaniel Harper might think this was business, but Lila played for more than money. She was playing for her future, and wouldn't let anyone, not the city prejudice, or even Nathaniel, silence her song. Lila Jackson stood at the iron gates of Nathaniel Harper's Upper East Side mansion, her keyboard case slung over one shoulder, and her backpack holding everything she owned gripping the other. The rain from 2 nights ago had cleared, leaving a crisp autumn morning, but the weight of her decision pressed heavier than the Manhattan skyline looming behind her. She'd signed Nathaniel's contract, trading 9 months of her life for $5 million and a chance to reclaim her music. Now, as the gates swung open with a mechanical hum, she wondered if she'd stepped into a dream or a cage. A housekeeper. Mrs. Elena Torres greeted her with a polite nod. "Welcome, Ms. Jackson. I'll show you to the guest house." Her accent carried a trace of Puerto Rico, and her eyes, though kind, held a flicker of curiosity. Lila followed her across a manicured lawn, the mansion's white stone facade gleaming like a museum. The guest house, a 2-story cottage tucked behind a rose garden, was larger than any apartment Lila had ever lived in. Inside, hardwood floors shone under a chandelier, and a stocked kitchen gleamed with stainless steel. Lila set her keyboard on the living room floor, its battered case stark against the pristine decor. "This can't be real," she whispered, her fingers brushing the marble countertop. But reality intruded quickly. As Mrs. Torres showed her the bedroom, complete with a 4-poster bed and silk linens, Lila caught whispers from 2 maids passing the hall. "Another one of Mr. Hopper's projects," one muttered. "Bet she's gone in a month." The other snickered, her voice low but clear. "Probably thinks she's hit the jackpot." Lila's jaw tightened, but she kept her head high, a skill honed from years of navigating spaces where she wasn't wanted. She remembered Juilliard, where classmates whispered "scholarship kid" as if it were a slur. She'd learned to let her music answer for her. That afternoon, as Lila unpacked her few belongings, a sharp knock interrupted her. At the door stood Cassandra Harper, Nathaniel's sister, her tailored blazer and icy stare screaming old money. "Ms. Jackson." Cassandra said, her tone clipped. "I'm here to set expectations. My brother's generous, but don't mistake this for a fairy tale. You're here for a job. Do it, take the money, and leave." Lila met her gaze unflinching. "I signed a contract, Ms. Harper. I know the terms." Cassandra's lips thinned. "Good, because the Harper name isn't a ladder for climbers. Stay out of our world." She turned on her heel, leaving a chill in the air. Lila closed the door, her hands trembling, not with fear, but with defiance. She'd faced worse than Cassandra's disdain: landlords who'd locked her out, professors who'd dismissed her talent. This was just another stage, and she'd play through. That evening, seeking solace, Lila set up her keyboard in the guest house's living room. Her fingers found Claire de Lune Debussy's delicate notes, blending with a gospel undertone she'd learned from her mother Elise. The music wrapped around her, drowning out the maid's whispers and Cassandra's warning. She didn't notice the guest house door open until the final chord faded and a voice broke the silence. "That's extraordinary," Nathaniel said, standing in the doorway, his suit jacket unbuttoned, a glass of bourbon in hand. His blue eyes, usually guarded, held a flicker of something softer: admiration, perhaps, or memory. Lila's hands froze on the keys. "Didn't hear you come in." "I knocked," he said, stepping inside. "You were elsewhere." "Where'd you learn to play like that, Juilliard, for a bit?" she said, her voice steady, despite the intrusion before life got in the way. Nathaniel nodded, swirling his drink. "My mother played not like you, but enough to make a house feel like a home. She'd have liked your style." He paused, his gaze distant, then refocused. "The guest house suit you? It's more than I'm used to," Lila admitted, choosing her words carefully. "But your staff's got opinions, and your sister's not exactly rolling out the welcome mat." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Cassandra's protective. Ignore the staff. They don't matter. Easy for you to say. Lila said, an edge creeping into her voice. They're not whispering about you. He studied her, as if seeing her for the first time. You're not what I expected, Ms. Jackson. And what's that? She challenged, her fingers brushing the keys. Someone who'd break under pressure, he said. You don't. Lila held his gaze, her heart pounding. Pressure's an old friend. I've been playing through it my whole life. Nathaniel set his glass on a table, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Keep playing then. It's why you're here. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. If the staff bothers you, tell Mrs. Torres. She'll handle it. As the door closed, Lila exhaled, her fingers returning to the keys. She played a new piece, a fierce improvisation that wove her mother's gospel with classical fire, as if to prove Nathaniel right and to remind herself who she was. With its luxury and judgment, the guest house was a new world. But it wasn't her first battle. She'd signed Nathaniel's deal to reclaim her future, not to shrink under scrutiny. Yet as she played, she couldn't shake the memory of Nathaniel's softened gaze, the hint of a man behind the millionaire. This was business, she told herself, but the music between them felt like something else, something neither had planned. Outside, Cassandra watched from the garden, her silhouette sharp against the roses. She dialed a number, her voice low. Marcus, it's Cassandra. We need to talk about Nathaniel's new arrangement. Her eyes narrowed as Lila's music drifted through the night, a challenge she wouldn't ignore. Lila Jackson lay on the examination table in Dr. Evelyn Carter's sterile office, the hum of medical equipment amplifying her unease. The room had white walls and sharp edges, a far cry from the Brooklyn Community Center, where she'd played her mother's gospel hymns to steady her nerves. Today was the artificial insemination procedure to fulfill her contract with Nathaniel Harper. $5 million, a new life for her music, all hinged on this moment. Yet, as Dr. Carter adjusted an IV drip, Lila felt less like a woman and more like a vessel, her body a means to an end. Dr. Carter, her expression clinical, reviewed a chart. Everything looks good, Ms. Jackson. We'll monitor you closely post-procedure. Mr. Harper requested daily health reports. Her tone was professional, but detached, as if Lila were a case study, not a person. Lila gripped the table's edge, her knuckles tight. She'd faced judgment before Juilliard professors' shelter staff, but this felt different, like her humanity was an afterthought. The door opened, and Nathaniel entered, his suit impeccable, but his posture tense. Is everything ready? He asked Dr. Carter. His voice clipped, though his eyes flicked to Lila with a trace of concern. On schedule, Dr. Carter replied, preparing a syringe. Ms. Jackson, you'll feel a mild sedative soon. It'll keep you comfortable. Lila nodded, her throat dry. Nathaniel stood by the wall, arms crossed as if distancing himself from the process he'd set in motion. But when Dr. Carter stepped out to fetch a nurse, he moved closer, his gaze softening. You're sure about this? He asked quietly. Signed the contract, didn't I? Lila said, forcing a smile. No turning back now. He studied her, his usual composure faltering. Most people would have walked away by now. Cassandra's not making it easy. Lila shrugged, the sedative loosening her guard. Cassandra's just another critic. I've had plenty. Like the Juilliard dean who said my music was too emotional to be classical. Her voice carried a bitter edge, and memories of her mother Elise urged her to keep playing despite the rejections. Nathaniel's brow furrowed. They were wrong. I heard you that night. Your music. It's alive. The compliment caught her off guard, warmth spreading through her. Your mother played, you said. Was she like that? Alive. He hesitated, his fingers brushing the edge of the table. She was. Chopin mostly on an old upright. She'd play after my father's board meetings when he'd tear into me for not being enough. She died when I was 12. Cancer. His voice cracked a rare glimpse of the man behind the millionaire. Lila's heart ached, her loss mirroring his. My mom, Elise, went the same way. I was 20. Everything I had went to her bills, then the hospital mixed up her records and I thought. She swallowed hard. I thought I'd failed her. Music's all I've got left of her. Nathaniel's eyes met hers, a shared grief bridging the gap between them. You haven't failed her. Not if you play like that. Dr. Carter returned, breaking the moment. We're ready, she said, her tone brisk. Nathaniel stepped back, but his gaze lingered on Lila silently, acknowledging their exchange. The procedure was quick, a blur of cold instruments and clinical instructions. Lila focused on the ceiling, humming her mother's hymn, His Eye is on the Sparrow, to anchor herself. Dr. Carter instructed her to rest when it was over, her voice softening slightly. Take it easy, Ms. Jackson. This is just the start. Back at the mansion, Lila retreated to the guest house, her body heavy with the weight of what she'd done. She unpacked her keyboard, needing music to process the day, but a knock interrupted her. Nathaniel stood at the door, a rare uncertainty in his stance. He said he wanted to see this, he said, and went toward the main house. Curious, Lila followed him across the lawn, past the rose garden where Cassandra's warning still lingered. He led her to a sunlit music room, inside the mansion, where a polished baby grand piano gleamed. Nathaniel said it was my mother's, his fingers brushing the keys. No one's played it since she died. Your keyboard's fine, but this, it deserves you. Lila's breath caught. The piano was a relic of his past, a gesture far beyond their contract. She sat at the bench, her fingers tracing the ivory keys, and played a single chord rich and resonant. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't thank me, Nathaniel said, his tone gruff but warm. Just play. It's been quiet for too long. As she began a piece, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, laced with gospel flourishes. Nathaniel lingered in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. Lila felt the music weave their losses together. Her mother's hymns and his mother's Chopin, a fragile thread in a deal meant to be cold. But the piano's notes carried something else, whether this was still business or the start of something neither could control. Outside, Mrs. Torres paused, gardening, listening to the music drift through the mansion. She smiled, sensing a shift in the air. But in her office, Cassandra Harper sat at her desk, a file on Lila open before her eviction records shelter logs. Her fingers tapped the phone, her voice low, as she spoke to an unknown contact. She's playing his mother's piano now. We need to move faster. Lila Jackson sat in Dr. Evelyn Carter's office, and the ultrasound wand was cold against her skin. 2 weeks had passed since the procedure, and her body felt foreign. Nausea lingered, and exhaustion clung like damp clothes. The sterile room with its humming machines and antiseptic smell amplified her unease. But she held her chin high, determined not to show weakness. Nathaniel stood nearby. His arms crossed his tailored suit, contrasting with the hospital gown draped over her. His presence was unexpected. He'd insisted on attending citing responsibility, but his tense posture hinted at something more. Dr. Carter moved the wand, her eyes narrowing at the screen. The steady whoosh, whoosh of a heartbeat filled the room, then layered with another. Lila's breath caught. Is that normal? She asked, her voice tight. Dr. Carter adjusted her glasses, and her clinical demeanor softened. Not quite. Mr. Harper, we discussed the risks of multiple births with this treatment. It's rare, but... She turned the screen toward them, revealing 3 tiny shapes, each pulsing with life. Congratulations! You're expecting triplets! Lila's world tilted. Triplets. 3 lives, not one growing inside her. Her hand drifted to her stomach, a mix of awe and fear swirling within. She glanced at Nathaniel, whose face had gone pale, his jaw clenched. Triplets, he said, his voice strained. That's not what we planned. Plans change, Dr. Carter said, her tone matter of fact. It's high risk, Ms. Jackson. We'll need extra monitoring and bed rest later on, but they're healthy so far. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing. This complicates everything. The contract. The timeline. He stopped, catching Lila's gaze. Her eyes held a challenge, daring him to reduce this to a business problem. They're not a contract, Lila said quietly, her hand still on her stomach. They're babies. Your babies. Nathaniel froze, the weight of her words settling over him. He nodded almost to himself and sat beside her. You're right. We'll adjust. His voice softened a crack in his usual control. Are you okay? Lila managed a small smile, masking her fear. I've handled worse odds. I'll manage. But the world outside wasn't as forgiving. By evening, a hospital staffer had leaked the news to the press. Lila woke to her phone buzzing with notifications, headlines screaming across her screen. Harper heir scandal homeless. Surrogate carries triplets. Paparazzi swarmed the mansion's gates, their cameras flashing as she stepped out for a doctor's follow-up. One reporter shouted, "How'd you snag a millionaire sweetheart?" The words stung, laced with assumptions about her worth. But Lila kept walking her head high, as she'd learned to do when the world tried to diminish her. Back at the guest house, Lila scrolled through the articles, each painting her as a schemer, a nobody exploiting Nathaniel's wealth. The comments were worse, some dripping with venom she'd faced before, words that questioned her place in his world, her right to carry his children. She slammed her phone down, her hands shaking, and turned to her keyboard. The notes of his eye is on the sparrow, poured out fierce and grounding her mother's hymn, a shield against the noise. Nathaniel knocked, entering without waiting for an answer. He carried a tablet, his expression grim. I saw the headlines, he said, setting the device down. I've got my PR team on it, but it'll take time. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't stop them, Lila said, her fingers pausing on the keys. They think I'm a gold digger, that I planned this. Nathaniel sat across from her, his eyes searching hers. You didn't plan anything. I did. And I didn't plan for... He gestured vaguely toward her stomach. 3. Or for you to be more than a name on a contract. Lila's breath hitched. His honesty was disarming, a glimpse of the man who'd lingered at her music that first night. Then, what am I now? She asked, her voice steady despite the question's weight. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Someone I trust. Someone who plays like the world's listening even when it's tearing you apart. He pulled a folder from his briefcase. I had Marcus revise the contract. The payments increased to cover the triplets' care, $7 million. And the relocation clause? It's gone. The babies need you. I want you to stay. Lila stared at the papers, her heart pounding. The original deal had been her escape, a ticket to Vienna. Now Nathaniel was offering a tether to him, to the children. She thought of her mother Elise, who'd taught her to play through pain to find strength in music. Staying meant more than money. It meant a future she hadn't dared imagine, one where she wasn't erased. You're sure? She asked, her fingers brushing the revised contract. Nathaniel said, I don't make offers lightly. A faint smile breaking through. And I don't trust easily. But you're different. Lila nodded, her resolve hardening. Okay, I'll stay for them. She touched her stomach, feeling the weight of 3 lives, 3 futures. As Nathaniel left, Lila returned to her keyboard, the hymn now softer, hopeful. But outside, Cassandra Harper stood by the rose garden, her phone pressed to her ear. She's staying, she hissed to an unknown contact. Triplets, Marcus said. We must dig deeper into her past. Find something to stop this. Her eyes glinted with determination, the headlines fueling her resolve to protect the Harper legacy at any cost. Lila Jackson sat at the baby grand piano in Nathaniel Harper's music room, her fingers weaving through a jazzed-up rendition of Bach's Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring. The mansion's high ceilings amplified the notes, filling the space with a warmth that softened the marble's cold elegance. 3 weeks into her pregnancy with triplets, Lila's nausea had eased, but the media frenzy outside the gates had not. Headlines still buzzed with speculation about her motives, and though Nathaniel's PR team had quelled the worst, the whispers lingered. Inside the piano was her sanctuary, a place where the world's judgment couldn't reach. The music room's door swung open and Cassandra Harper stormed in her heels, clicking sharply on the hardwood. Her tailored coat and diamond earrings screamed privilege, but her eyes burned with something darker resentment. "Enjoying your little performance, Ms. Jackson," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You've certainly made yourself at home." Lila's fingers stilled the final chord hanging in the air. She turned on the bench, meeting Cassandra's glare. "It's just music, Ms. Harper. Nathaniel said I could play. Play, yes, but don't think it makes you family." Cassandra stepped closer, clutching a manila folder. "I've done some digging. Eviction notices, shelter records, and a few nights in a Brooklyn holding cell for loitering. Quite the resume for the mother of the Harper heirs." Lila's stomach twisted, but she kept her expression steady, a skill honed from years of facing down critics. "Sounds like you've been busy," she said coolly. "Find anything worth printing?" Cassandra's lips curled. "Not yet, but I will, and when I do, the press will eat it up. You're a liability, Lila. My brother's too blind to see it, but I'm not. Someone like you won't drag the Harper name through the mud. Someone like me." Lila stood, her voice sharp. "Say what you mean, Cassandra." Cassandra didn't flinch. A nobody who thinks she can climb into our world with a sob story and a song. Nathaniel's made mistakes before, but this, triplets with you. It's a scandal waiting to happen. Lila's hands clenched, memories of Juilliard, flashing professors, dismissing her as too raw donors, favoring polished prodigies. She'd fought to be seen then and wouldn't shrink now. "I'm here because Nathaniel chose me. If you've got a problem, take it up with him." Cassandra tossed the folder onto the piano papers, spilling across the keys. "Oh, I will. But consider this a warning. Step carefully, or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." She turned and left her heels echoing like a metronome. Lila sank onto the bench, her breath uneven. She gathered the paper's photocopies of old eviction notices, a blurry police report from a night she'd been caught sleeping in a park. Cassandra's threat wasn't empty. The press would twist her past into a narrative of greed. Yet as she touched the piano keys, her mother's voice echoed, "Play through the noise, baby girl." Lila launched into "His Eye is on the Sparrow," the gospel hymn, fierce and unyielding, a declaration that she wouldn't break. That evening, Nathaniel appeared at the guest house. His tie loosened, and there was a shadow of fatigue under his eyes. "Mrs. Torres said you were upset," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "What happened?" Lila hesitated, then handed him the folder. "Your sister's playing detective. Thinks she can scare me off with my past." Nathaniel scanned the papers, his jaw tightening. Cassandra's overstepping. "I'll handle her." "She's not wrong about one thing," Lila said, her voice steady but vulnerable. "My past isn't pretty. Shelter's debts, and a night in a cell because I had nowhere to go. If that's too much for your name." "It's not." Nathaniel cut in, his tone firm. He set the folder down and met her gaze. "I don't care about your past. I care about the woman who plays like she's got something to prove. And you do." Lila's throat tightened, his words stirring something she hadn't felt in years, being seen. "Why do you trust me?" she asked. "You barely know me." Nathaniel stepped closer. his voice low. Because you don't pretend. My father taught me to control everything people deal's emotions. It left me empty. You play like you're free, even when the world's against you. I haven't felt that since my mother's music. Their eyes locked the air heavy with unspoken possibility. Lila broke the moment, turning to her keyboard. Play something with me, she said, a challenge to keep things light. You told your mother that you played. You must know something. Nathaniel hesitated, then sat beside her, his fingers tentative on the keys. He played a simple Chopin waltz, halting but earnest, and Lila joined in weaving gospel chords around his melody. The duet was imperfect, raw, but it filled the room with a warmth that felt like a promise. Nathaniel's hand brushed hers when they finished, a fleeting touch that sent her heart racing. You're not bad, Lila teased, masking her nerves. You're better, he said, a rare smile breaking through. Keep playing, Lila. This house needs it. Lila's fingers lingered on the keys as he left the duet replaying in her mind. Nathaniel saw her not as a contract, but as a person. But Cassandra's threat loomed, a reminder that this world wasn't hers yet. Across the estate, Marcus Tate answered his phone in his office. Cassandra. I told you I'm not digging up dirt on Lila, he said, his voice firm. Nathaniel trusts her. You should too. She's a risk, Marcus. Cassandra snapped. I've got a private investigator now. If there's anything she's hiding, I'll find it. Marcus sighed, hanging up. He glanced at a photo on his desk. His mother, a Harlem school teacher, who'd faced her share of closed doors. He'd fought to belong in Nathaniel's world, just as Lila was fighting now. He dialed Nathaniel. We need to talk about your sister. She's not letting this go. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered under crystal chandeliers, a sea of tuxedos and sequined gowns swirling to the strains of a string quartet. Lila Jackson stood at the edge of the crowd, her navy dress borrowed from Nathaniel Harper's stylist, fitting perfectly, but feeling like a costume. 2 months into her pregnancy with triplets, her body showed no signs yet, but the weight of the media's scrutiny pressed heavily. Nathaniel had insisted she attend this charity gala for Harper Industries, a chance to control the narrative, after the tabloid storm labeling her a gold digger. Lila wasn't so sure. This world of wealth and whispers was as foreign as the guest house had been. Nathaniel stood beside her, his presence steady but formal, his tailored tuxedo accentuating his sharp features. Stay close, he murmured, guiding her through the crowd. These people smell weakness. Please don't give them any. Lila nodded, her jaw tight. She'd faced judgment before Juilliard's elitist hall's shelter lines, but this was a new battlefield. A silver-haired woman in a pearl necklace approached her, smile thin. You must be Nathaniel's guest, she said, her eyes flicking over Lila as if cataloging her flaws. I'm Beatrice Langley, chair of the Arts Board, and you are Lila Jackson. Lila replied, her voice steady. I'm a musician. Beatrice's eyebrows lifted, a hint of condescension in her tone. A musician. How charming. Are you with the quartet? Before Lila could respond, a waiter interrupted, offering champagne to Nathaniel, but bypassing Lila. Oh, I thought you were staff, he stammered, catching her glare. The slight stung, a reminder of the assumptions that followed her into this world. She straightened, channeling her mother's advice. Play through the noise, baby girl. Nathaniel's hand brushed her arm, a subtle anchor. Lila's my guest, he told Beatrice, his tone firm. And a better pianist than anyone you've got on stage tonight. Beatrice's smile faltered, but she recovered with a nod. I look forward to hearing from you then. She drifted away, leaving a trail of perfume and skepticism. Lila felt the weight of curious stares and hushed conversations as the evening continued. A man in a pinstripe suit mistook her for a server, asking her to fetch a drink. A woman whispered to her companion, Is that the surrogate from the papers? Lila kept her composure, but each slight chipped away at her resolve. She excused herself, slipping toward a grand piano in a quiet corner of the ballroom, its polished surface beckoning like an old friend. She sat her fingers tracing the keys and began to play a daring blend of Mozart's Rondo alla Turca, infused with gospel rhythms her mother Elise had taught her. The music started soft, then swelled, drawing eyes from across the room. Conversations hushed, and the string quartet paused, their bows stilled. Lila poured her defiance into the notes, each chord a rebuttal to the whispers, the assumptions, the headlines. She was no gold digger, no nobody. She was Lila Jackson, and her music demanded to be heard. When the final note rang out, the ballroom erupted in applause. Nathaniel stood at the front of the crowd, his eyes alight with something beyond admiration, perhaps pride or something more profound. Lila rose, her heart pounding, as guests approached their earlier skepticism, replaced by curiosity. "That was extraordinary," a man said, offering his card. "I run a conservatory. We'd love to have you perform." Lila smiled, tucking the card away. "Thank you. I'll think about it." Nathaniel joined her, his hand grazing her back. "You didn't just play," he said softly. "You owned this room." "They didn't expect that," Lila replied, her voice low. "They thought I was here to serve drinks, not music." His jaw tightened, a flicker of anger in his eyes. "They're wrong, and I'll make sure they know it." He turned to the crowd, raising his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, Lila Jackson isn't just my guest. She's a musician bringing life to my family, and I'm honored to have her here." The room quieted, his words carrying weight, silencing the whispers. Lila's breath caught his public defense, a shield against the gala's judgment. Nathaniel led her to a balcony overlooking the city as the crowd dispersed. The night air was cool, Manhattan's lights sparkling below. She said, "You didn't have to do that," her voice soft. "Yes, I did," he replied, leaning against the railing. "I've spent my life playing their games and keeping up appearances. My father drilled that into me. Control the room, never show weakness. But you don't play by their rules. You make your own." Lila studied him, seeing the man beneath the tuxedo. "Sounds like your father was hard to please." "He was," Nathaniel admitted, his gaze distant. "Nothing I did was enough. Built an empire, married the right women twice. And still I was never his son, just his heir. I'm scared I'll fail these kids the same way." Lila touched his arm, a rare gesture. "You're not him. You're here standing up for me, for them. That's not failure." He looked at her, his eyes searching. "You make me want to be better, Lila, not just for them, but for you." The moment hung between them, fragile and electric, until a throat cleared behind them. Cassandra Harper stood at the balcony's entrance, her eyes cold. She said, "Quite the show, Ms. Jackson," her voice laced with venom. "But don't think one song changes anything. Nathaniel, we need to talk privately." Nathaniel's expression hardened. "Not now, Cassandra." She smirked, undeterred. "Enjoy your moment, Lila. It won't last." She turned and vanished into the crowd, her threat lingering like a sour note. Lila exhaled, her triumph tempered, but not erased. She'd faced a room of skeptics, and one with Nathaniel by her side. As they returned to the gala, her fingers itched for the piano again, ready to play through whatever Cassandra or the world threw at her next. The moon hung low over the Upper East Side, casting silver light through the music room's floor-to-ceiling windows. Lila Jackson sat at Nathaniel Harper's baby grand piano, her fingers weaving through a soft rendition of Amazing Grace, infused with the gospel chords her mother Elise had taught her. 3 months into her pregnancy with triplets, Lila's body felt heavier, Her mornings marked by waves of nausea, but the piano was her refuge. The media storm had quieted since her triumph at the charity gala, but Cassandra Harper's threats lingered a shadow over her fragile peace. The mansion was quiet. Its staff retired for the night, leaving Lila alone with her music. She played to steady herself, to drown out the memory of Cassandra's folder eviction notices, a loitering charge that had tried to reduce her to a headline. The notes carried her back to Atlanta, her mother's kitchen, where Elise's voice blended with the radio's hymns. "Keep playing, baby girl," Elise would say. "Your heart's your strength." Lila's fingers faltered as a new sensation stirred a flutter, faint but unmistakable, deep in her belly. She paused, her hands drifting to her stomach, a smile breaking through. The triplets were moving. The door creaked open, and Nathaniel appeared, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a rare departure from his usual tailored suits. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, carrying a warmth that had grown familiar since the gala. Lila shook her head, her hands still on her stomach. "They're kicking," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "Feel." Without thinking, she pressed his hand to the spot where the flutters danced. Nathaniel's eyes widened as he felt the subtle movements, his breath catching. For a moment, they were still connected by the miracle of 3 tiny lives. "They're real," he whispered, his hand lingering. "Not just a contract anymore." Lila met his gaze, her heart racing. "They never were. Not to me." Nathaniel's hand stayed on hers, the air between them charged. He leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "Lila, I didn't expect this. You, them. It's more than I planned." His eyes searched hers, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. Without warning, he closed the distance, his lips brushing hers in a tentative kiss. Lila froze, then melted into it, her hands finding his shoulders. The kiss was soft, urgent, a release of feelings they'd both fought to contain. They pulled apart, breathless, the piano's silence louder than the music had been. Lila's mind spun. This wasn't part of the deal or safe. But her heart stirred by the triplets' kicks, and Nathaniel's touch didn't care. "What are we doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Nathaniel admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "But I know I don't want to stop." Before Lila could respond, a shadow moved outside the window. Cassandra stood in the rose garden, her phone pressed to her ear, her eyes fixed on the music room. She turned away, her voice a hiss in the night. "It's worse than I thought. They're getting too close. I need that investigator's report now." Inside, Lila and Nathaniel didn't notice, lost in the moment. The next morning, Lila woke to find a package at the guest house door, a leather-bound book of piano scores blending classical pieces with gospel arrangements. A note in Nathaniel's precise handwriting read, "For you. Keep playing. N." She traced the cover, her heart swelling. The gift was personal, a bridge between their worlds, unlike the cold terms of their contract. At breakfast, Lila joined Nathaniel in the mansion's dining room, the book tucked under her arm. "This is beautiful," she said, holding it up. "Why?" He sipped his coffee, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Because you're bringing music back to this house. And because I wanted to." Lila's smile faltered as she caught Mrs. Torres's glance from the doorway, a mix of warmth and worry. The housekeeper had overheard Cassandra's late-night calls, her suspicions growing. Lila pushed the thought aside, focusing on Nathaniel. "You're not what I expected," she said. "That first night I thought you were all business." "I was," he said, his tone serious. "My father taught me to keep everyone at arm's length. Love and trust were all weaknesses to him. After my mother died, I believed him. He built walls and married women who fit his mold. They crumbled, and so did I." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "Then I heard you play." You don't hide, Lila. You feel everything, and it's changing me. Lila's throat tightened, his words echoing her fears. She'd spent years guarding her heart, surviving on her terms. But Nathaniel's honesty, his touch, was unraveling her defenses. This scares me, she admitted. The baby's you, all of it. What if it's too much? Then we face it together, he said, his hand brushing hers across the table. For them. For us. Their moment was interrupted by Marcus Tate's arrival, his expression grim. Nathaniel. We've got a problem, he said, glancing at Lila. Cassandra's investigator found a social worker's report from Lila's time in a shelter. It's thin, but she's threatening to leak it to the press, claiming it proves you're unstable. Lila's stomach dropped, memories of shelter nights, cold cots, judgmental staff flooding back. That's my life they're twisting, she said, her voice steady, despite the hurt. I survived. That's not instability. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. Cassandra's gone too far. Marcus, get me everything on her investigator. We're stopping this now. As Marcus nodded and left, Lila touched the piano book, her mother's hymn echoing in her mind. Cassandra's threats were a storm, but Lila had played through worse. With Nathaniel's support and the triplets' tiny kicks, she felt a strength she hadn't known she had. This wasn't just a deal anymore, a fight for her place, her family, and something that felt dangerously like love. Lila Jackson sipped Cassandra Harper's smoothie, left on the guest house counter, its berry tang masking a faint bitter edge. At 6 months pregnant with triplets, her body felt like a tightrope balancing exhaustion and the constant flutter of tiny kicks. The mansion's quiet morning was a rare reprieve from the media's lingering scrutiny and Cassandra's veiled threats. Lila set the glass down, her stomach lurching not from nausea, but from an instinct honed by years of surviving alone. Something was wrong. She spit out the next sip, the bitter taste lingering, and dialed Dr. Evelyn Carter. Don't drink anymore, Dr. Carter said, her voice urgent over the phone. Get to the hospital now. I'll meet you there. Lila grabbed her coat, her heart racing, and called Mrs. Torres, who rushed her to the car. As they sped through Manhattan, Lila clutched her stomach, the triplets' movements frantic as if sensing her fear. Her mother's hymn, "His Eye is on the Sparrow," played in her mind, a steadying rhythm against the panic. At the hospital, Dr. Carter's tests confirmed the worst. The smoothie contained an herb known to induce premature labor, dangerous for a high-risk pregnancy. She said, "You're lucky you caught it." Her usual clinical tone softened by concern. "We need an emergency C-section. The stress has triggered early contractions, and your blood pressure is spiking." Lila's vision blurred, fear gripping her. The babies. Will they be okay? They're fighters, Dr. Carter said, squeezing her hand. We'll do everything we can. Nathaniel burst into the room, his face pale, his tie askew. What happened? He demanded, his eyes locking onto Lila's. Torres, hovering nearby, recounted finding the smoothie and Cassandra's unusual insistence that Lila drink it. Nathaniel's expression darkened, a storm brewing behind his eyes. Cassandra, he growled, turning to Marcus Tate, who had just arrived. Find her, now. As nurses prepped Lila for surgery, Nathaniel stayed by her side, his hand gripping hers. He said, "You'll be fine," his voice steady despite the tremor in his fingers. "You and the babies. I'm here." Lila nodded, her throat tight. "I'm scared." She whispered the words, slipping out before she could stop them. "I know," he said, his forehead touching hers. "But you're the strongest person I've ever met. You've got this." The operating room was a blur of bright lights and masked faces. Lila clung to Nathaniel's promise as the anesthesia took hold, her mother's hymn fading into darkness. Outside, chaos erupted. Reviewing hospital security footage, Marcus spotted Cassandra slipping into a staff room, her purse bulging. He intercepted her, his voice low but firm. What did you do, Cassandra? She froze, her eyes wild. I was protecting the family, she hissed. She doesn't belong here, Marcus. Those babies, they're Harper's, not hers. You could have killed them. Marcus snapped, signaling security. And Lila, this isn't protection, it's madness. Cassandra's composure cracked, tears welling. Nathaniel's throwing everything away. Our father's legacy, our name for her. I had to stop it. Marcus shook his head, his past as an outsider in elite circles fueling his resolve. You're wrong. Lila's giving him something your father never did, a real family. Security escorted Cassandra away, her protests echoing down the hall. In the operating room, Dr. Carter worked swiftly, delivering 3 tiny babies, 2 girls and a boy, each barely 3 pounds. Lila, unconscious, didn't hear their first cries, fragile but fierce. Nathaniel barred from the room, paced the waiting area, his mind racing. He thought of his father, whose cold ambition had left him and Cassandra scarred, unable to trust love. He'd vowed to be different, but now with Lila and the babies at risk, fear clawed at him. He sank into a chair, head in his hands, whispering a prayer he hadn't uttered since his mother's death. Dr. Carter emerged, her scrub stained, but her face calm. They're alive, she said. Seeing Nathaniel's panic, all 3 are in the NICU. Lila lost blood, but she's stable. She'll need time, but she's a fighter like her babies. Nathaniel's legs nearly gave out, relief flooding him. Can I see them? Soon, Dr. Carter said. Prepare yourself. The NICU's intense. In the NICU, Nathaniel peered through the glass at 3 tiny incubators, each holding a miracle smaller than his hand. In the middle, the boy hiccuped softly. The girls on either side flexed tiny fingers. Tears stung his eyes as he pressed his hand to the glass, overwhelmed by their fragility and strength, Lila's strength. Marcus joined him, his expression heavy. Cassandra's in custody. She admitted to the herb and said she got it from a contact. She's broken, Nathaniel. It's not just about Lila. It's your father, what he did to you both. Nathaniel nodded, his voice low. I know. She needs help, not punishment. I'll arrange a facility, but I must be here now. He turned back to the incubators, his resolve hardening. Cassandra's betrayal had nearly cost him everything, but Lila and the babies were his future now, not his father's legacy. In recovery, Lila stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Nathaniel was there, his hand finding hers. They're here, he whispered. Our babies. You did it. Lila's lips curved, weak but radiant. We did it, she corrected, her voice a thread. As she drifted back to sleep, Nathaniel held her hand, the weight of their shared fight anchoring him. Cassandra's betrayal had tested them, but it had also revealed what mattered most. Not a contract, but a family forged in courage and care. The neonatal intensive care unit hummed with the soft beeps of monitors, a sterile symphony under fluorescent lights. Lila Jackson lay in her hospital bed, her body aching, but her heart full, the haze of anesthesia fading. The emergency C-section had brought 3 tiny lives into the world, 2 girls and a boy, each fighting to survive. She hadn't seen them yet, but Nathaniel Harper's whispered assurance, "They're here," echoed in her mind. 6 months pregnant. She'd feared losing them to Cassandra's betrayal, but they were alive, and so was she. Nathaniel sat beside her, his hand clasped around hers, his usually pristine suit rumpled from a sleepless night. His eyes, red-rimmed but steady, met hers as she stirred. "You're awake," he said, relief softening his voice. "How do you feel? Like I ran a marathon?" Lila murmured, her throat dry. "The babies. Are they okay?" "They're fighters," he said, echoing Dr. Carter's words. "In the NICU, small but strong. You'll see them soon." His thumb brushed her knuckles, a quiet gesture that felt more intimate than their kiss in the music room. Lila nodded her hand, drifting to her now flat stomach. The absence of kicks, a strange ache. She thought of her mother Elise, whose gospel hymns had carried her through loss. She said, "I need to see them." Her voice firm, despite her weakness. Dr. Evelyn Carter entered her scrubs, replaced by a white coat, her expression warm. "You're stable, Lila, but you lost blood. Rest for another day, and then you can visit the NICU. The babies hold their own 3 pounds each on ventilators, but respond well." Lila's eyes stung with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, grateful for Dr. Carter's shift from clinical detachment to compassion. Nathaniel squeezed her hand. "I've seen them. They're incredible like you." Dr. Carter smiled, handing Lila a small keyboard Nathaniel had brought from the mansion. He thought this might help. Studies say that music's good for the soul and preemies. She left, giving them privacy. Lila traced the keyboard's keys. Her mother's hymn, "His Eye is on the Sparrow," surfacing in her mind. "You brought this for me?" she asked Nathaniel. "For you and them," he said. "They need to hear you play." Later that day, Lila, in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse, entered the NICU. 3 tiny incubators glowed under soft lights, each holding a miracle. The boy in the middle had a tuft of dark hair. The girls on either side flexed delicate fingers. Tubes and wires surrounded them, but their tiny chests rose and fell with stubborn life. Lila's breath caught love overwhelming her fear. "They're ours," she whispered. Nathaniel stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "They need names," he said, his voice thick. "I was thinking, Grace for the girl on the left. She's got your strength." Lila smiled, tears falling. "Noah for the boy. He's calm like peace after a storm. And Joy for the other girl, she's got a spark." The names felt right, a tribute to their journey. Grace, Noah, Joy. Nathaniel repeated, his eyes on the babies. "Perfect." Lila played a soft lullaby on the keyboard, the notes gentle but resonant. The monitors showed slight improvements in the babies' vitals, as if they knew their mother's music. Nathaniel watched his face, softening, memories of his mother's piano stirring. Alone in his study the night before, he'd found his father's old journal. Its pages filled with lessons on control. Emotions are a liability. He'd torn it up, vowing to be different for Grace, Noah, Joy, and Lila. Outside the NICU, Marcus Tate approached, his expression heavy. "Cassandra's been moved to a psychiatric facility upstate," he said. "She's talking finally. It's not just about Lila. It's your father, his rules, his cruelty. She thought she was saving the family, but she's broken." Nathaniel nodded, his jaw tight. "She nearly killed them. But she's my sister. I should have seen her pain sooner. Arrange the best care, Marcus. I want her to heal." Marcus hesitated, then spoke. "I get it. My mom fought to get me through law school and faced doors slammed in her face. Cassandra's lost, but Lila, she's fighting for something real. You're lucky to have her." "I know." Nathaniel set his gaze, returning to Lila, her lullaby filling the NICU. "I'm not letting her go." Back in her room, Lila rested the keyboard beside her. Nathaniel sat close, his voice low. "I was wrong, Lila. This started as a deal, but it's more now. You the babies, you're my family. I'm not my father. I won't fail you." Lila met his eyes, her heart swelling. "You're not failing. You're here holding us together. That's enough." As she drifted to sleep, Nathaniel stayed watching over her. The NICU monitors beeped steadily. Grace, Noah, and Joy fighting for life, their mother's music, their first lullaby. Cassandra's betrayal had nearly shattered them, but it had forged something more substantial, a bond that no contract could define, a family born from courage and care. The lights of Carnegie Hall glowed warm against the Manhattan night, a beacon for the crowd gathered at Harper Industries' charity concert. Lila Jackson stood backstage, her fingers flexing nervously the weight of her pregnancy, now a gentle curve beneath her elegant black gown. 7 months had passed since the triplets Grace, Noah, and Joy arrived prematurely, and though they were still in the NICU, their growing strength fueled Lila's resolve. The media storm that had branded her a gold digger lingered, with tabloids still spinning tales of scandal. Tonight, Nathaniel had organized this concert to shift the narrative, and Lila's performance would be the centerpiece, a chance to reclaim her story. She peeked through the curtain, the auditorium packed with New York's elite, their jewels glinting under chandeliers. The whispers from the gala months ago echoed in her mind, guests mistaking her for staff, questioning her place. But tonight wasn't about fitting in, but about owning her voice. Nathaniel stood nearby, his tuxedo sharp, his eyes steady on her. "You ready?" he asked, his voice a quiet anchor. Lila nodded, clutching a program with her name listed, Lila Jackson, pianist. "As ready as I'll ever be. They're not here for me, though. They're here for you." He said, "They'll leave talking about you," a faint smile breaking through. "Play like you did that first night. Let them see who you are." The stage manager signaled, and Lila stepped into the spotlight, the grand piano gleaming. The crowd hushed curiosity, mixing with skepticism. She sat, her fingers brushing the keys, and took a breath, channeling her mother's hymn, "His Eye is on the Sparrow." She launched into a piece she'd composed, a fusion of Beethoven's ode to joy and gospel rhythms, a tribute to Grace, Noah, and Joy. The notes soared bold and soulful, weaving her past and present. The audience leaned forward, captivated, as Lila poured her heart into the music, defying every headline that had tried to define her. Halfway through, a heckler shouted, "What's a surrogate doing on stage?" The words stung, but Lila didn't falter. She shifted the melody, adding a defiant gospel flourish, her eyes flashing with resolve. The crowd erupted in applause, drowning out the heckler, and Lila felt a surge of power. This was her stage, her story, and no one could take it. The audience rose when the final chord rang out, their ovation thunderous. Lila stood, her chest heaving, and saw Marcus Tate and Dr. Evelyn Carter in the front row clapping fiercely. Marcus, his usual lawyer's reserve gone, gave her a proud nod, while Dr. Carter mouthed, "Beautiful." Lila's heart swelled. She'd won them over not as Nathaniel's surrogate, but as herself. Nathaniel joined her on stage, his presence commanding. The crowd quieted as he took the microphone. Tonight wasn't just about music, he said, his voice clear. It was about truth. Lila Jackson isn't a scandal. She's a musician, a mother, and the woman who's changed my life. Our children, Grace, Noah, and Joy, are our future, and I'm proud to stand with them. The audience murmured, some nodding, others whispering. But Nathaniel wasn't done. He turned to Lila, his eyes soft, and dropped to one knee, pulling a ring from his pocket, a simple band engraved with musical notes. "Lila Jackson," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You came into my life as a deal, but you showed me what matters. Love, music, family. Will you marry me? Not for contracts or legacies, but because I love you." Lila's breath caught tears pricking her eyes. The crowd faded, and all she saw was Nathaniel, the man who'd stopped his car in the rain, given her his mother's piano, and stood by her through Cassandra's betrayal. She thought of her mother, Elise, who taught her to play through pain, and of the triplets fighting in the NICU. This wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the one she wanted. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing clear. "Yes, Nathaniel." The crowd erupted again, cheers echoing as Nathaniel slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss. Lila melted into him, the piano behind them, a silent witness to their journey. Marcus clapped his eyes bright, while Dr. Carter dabbed at her eyes, whispering to a colleague, "I misjudged her. She's extraordinary." Backstage, Mrs. Torres beamed, holding a bouquet for Lila. "You did it, mija," she said, her voice warm. "You showed them all." Later, as they left the hall, Lila and Nathaniel faced a swarm of reporters. One shoved a microphone forward, her question sharp. "Ms. Jackson, how do you respond to claims you're using Mr. Harper for his wealth?" Lila paused, her hand in Nathaniel's, and smiled. "I'm here for love," she said, her voice firm. "For my children, my music, and the man who believes in both. Write that." The reporter scribbled, and Nathaniel squeezed her hand, his pride evident. As they drove back to the mansion, Lila leaned against him, the ring catching the streetlights. "You didn't have to do it on stage," she said, teasing big gesture for a businessman. "I'm not just a businessman anymore," he said, kissing her temple. "You taught me that." In the shadows of the hospital, Cassandra watched the news on her phone, her face drawn. Admitted to a psychiatric facility, she was beginning to face her pain. But Lila's triumph stung. Yet as she saw Nathaniel's proposal, a flicker of hope stirred. Maybe healing was possible even for her. The gardens of Nathaniel Harper's Upper East Side mansion bloomed with white roses and fairy lights, transformed into a haven for his wedding to Lila Jackson. The summer air was warm, carrying the scent of jasmine, and a small crowd of friends and family gathered under a starlit sky. 7 months after the triplets, Grace, Noah, and Joy survived their premature birth. They were healthy enough to leave the NICU, their tiny giggles mingling with the soft strains of a gospel choir. Lila stood in a guest room, adjusting her simple white gown, its lace sleeves echoing her mother's elegance. Her heart raced, not with nerves, but joy. This was no longer a deal, but a beginning. Mrs. Torres bustled in, her eyes bright. "Mija, you're glowing," she said, pinning a veil into Lila's hair. "Those babies are stealing the show, though. Noah's already charmed the guests." Lila laughed, her fingers brushing the musical note ring Nathaniel had given her at Carnegie Hall. "They get that from their father," she said, her voice warm. The triplets' survival, her triumph over media scrutiny and Nathaniel's love, had rewritten her story. But a knock at the door brought a surprise that stopped her breath. "Miss Lila." Mrs. Torres said, her voice hesitant. "Someone's here to see you. Says she's your aunt." Lila's heart skipped. Marion, her mother's sister, had raised her after Elise's death, but they'd lost touch when Lila's life unraveled. Evictions, shelters, pride keeping her from reaching out. "That's impossible," she whispered, but followed Mrs. Torres to the hallway. There stood Marion, her hair grayer, but her warm eyes unmistakable, leaning on a cane. "My girl," she said, tears glistening. "I saw you in the papers playing at that concert. I've been looking for you ever since you left Atlanta." Lila fell into her arms, tears spilling. "I thought you didn't want me anymore after I failed Mom." "Failed?" Marion cupped her face. "You survived, Lila. You're playing again, building a family. Elise would be so proud." They held each other, the years of separation melting away as Marion recounted her search, sparked by Lila's Carnegie performance. The reunion was cut short by the triplets' cries from the garden. "My grandbabies." Marion asked, her smile wide. Lila led her outside, where Nathaniel cradled Joy, while Marcus Tate and Dr. Evelyn Carter held Grace and Noah, their tiny outfits matching the wedding's white theme. Marion gasped, taking Noah's little hand. She said, "They've got your spirit," humming a gospel tune Elise had loved. As the ceremony began, A surprise guest stepped forward. Cassandra Harper, released from her psychiatric facility for a supervised visit. Her face, free of its usual sharpness, held a tentative hope. "I want to play if that's okay," she said softly, approaching the piano. Lila nodded, her heart open, despite the past. Cassandra played a wedding march, blending the melody Lila had performed that rainy night with classical grace, a gesture of amends. Marcus escorted Lila down the aisle, his lawyer's suit swapped for a tuxedo, his pride evident. "You've changed him," he whispered. "And me. Never thought I'd see a day like this." Lila smiled, passing Marion, who held Joy, and Mrs. Torres, who cradled Grace, both women, beaming. Nathaniel waited under a rose arch, Noah in his arms, his eyes shining with tears as he saw Lila. The ceremony was simple, their vows heartfelt. "Lila," Nathaniel said, his voice rough, "I thought I was buying an heir, but you gave me a life. Music, love, our children. You're my home." Lila's voice trembled as she replied, "You sheltered me, Nathaniel, but more, you gave me a place to be myself, a mother, a musician, your wife." They exchanged rings, the triplets adding their chorus, Grace squealing, Noah cooing, Joy clapping tiny hands. The minister grinned. "By the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband, wife, and family." The guests cheered, gospel and classical music blending, as the choir sang a nod to their shared worlds. The reception was a tapestry of their lives, soul food beside champagne. Lila's Juilliard mentor, dancing with Marcus, who stole glances at Mrs. Torres. Marion shared stories of Lila's childhood, her laughter mingling with the triplets' giggles. Cassandra approached Lila, her eyes downcast. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was wrong about you, about everything. Can I see them someday?" Lila took her hand. "You're their aunt. When you're ready, they'll need you." Cassandra's tears fell a step toward healing. As night fell, Lila and Nathaniel danced under the stars, the triplets asleep in a nearby bassinet. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close. "More than I dreamed," Lila said, glancing at Grace holding Noah's hand, Joy clutching a blanket. "They're connected already." "Like us," Nathaniel said, kissing her forehead. "I used to think love was a risk I couldn't afford. You showed me it's the only thing worth having." Marion joined them, her cane tapping. "Mind if I play?" she asked, sitting at the piano. She and Lila played "His Eye Is on the Sparrow," their duet a bridge between past and present. The triplets stirred their tiny sighs, harmonizing with the music, as Marcus and Mrs. Torres danced, their spark kindling. Cassandra watched, a faint smile breaking through, and the stars above shone on a family forged, not by contracts, but by love, music, and miracles.